So I'm gonna turn it over to T and let him just kind of open it up and just kind of give a structure for tonight, and then we'll go from there.
Awesome. So thank you all so much for joining us on this Grow Night. We have an amazing guest that's going to be joining us. He was with us, as Jason said, last year, and he rocked the house. We talk about a spirit-filled individual, a spirit-filled pastor. He was amazing. He still is amazing. I follow him on Facebook. Definitely check him out and check out the great work that he's doing in his ministry. But today is Grow Night. It is an opportunity for us to kind of engage and have those conversations and questions. That's Pastor Jason's favorite thing. He is an amazing teacher and he loves Q&A. So what we're going to do is, if you all have any questions, feel free to put them in the comment section. I'm going to be checking the comment section as well as Rejuvenate Church Live. If you have any questions as well, feed those to us. Madison and Tammy, our online care pastors, are going to be assisting me in monitoring those questions. And then we're going to get the party started. So I want to just provide the opportunity to allow both Jason and Pastor Kilgore to introduce themselves and talk about something that's interesting during these times. So I guess introduce yourself. And the question would be, what is the most interesting thing you've done since we've started kind of this online platform or being forced to do online church and ministry?
I'll let you go first, Kris.
All right, that's fine. I am Kris Kilgore, and I have been friends with Jason, Pastor Jason, I guess you guys call him, since I was 14 years old. I'm 42 now, so that's a few years under the bridge. But I pastor in Greenwood, South Carolina, the Durst Avenue Church of God, and I've only been here about 14 months. And this is my first time being a lead pastor anywhere, so it is still pretty new to me to be in these waters. But I was born in Florida, and I know T is heading to Florida, but I was born in a better part of Florida, down near Central Florida. And long time Miami Hurricane fan, and just enjoying life. I got 2 kids. I got an 11-year-old daughter who's about to turn 12, and I've got an 8-year-old son, and who broke his arm riding a skateboard a couple weeks ago during the quarantine. So that was great. But I have been married to my wife since 2006. Her name is Nisha, and she's wonderful. So wonderful, in fact, that she made 2 stops to bring me some coffee so I could be alert for this evening. So it was great. But I'm privileged and honored to be here. Honored to sit in the same virtual space as your pastors at Rejuvenate, and it truly is a blessing to be here. And during this time, I tell you what, it seems almost trivial, I guess, but one of the weirdest things I've done during this shutdown time is I have actually taught the Bible sitting down. I had never done that. I've taught a whole lot of classes, but I've never sat down to teach the scriptures. I'm a mover. I work with my hands a lot, and I bounce back and forth. It was weird. I tried it one week, couldn't do it, and then the next week I came back and I forced myself to do it. So that is probably the strangest feeling thing. It's like having somebody else's haircut for a day. It felt so weird. So
hey, you can get this anytime you want to, bro.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I might start with a mustache and see what that looks like, then go to the bald head, but I'm going to stick with this right now.
So they can't get me to sit down. I actually have sat my butt on a stool more during this quarantine time while I've been preaching on Sunday than I have in the 5 years that I've been there. So yeah, it's tough for me. But it's different. It's interesting. I'm Pastor Jason. I pastor Rejuvenate Church, and Rejuvenate is 5 years old. We just crossed our 5-year mark, and we're going to celebrate that when we get back together. We're going to find a way to celebrate our 5 years, and we're still going to have our grace year. I declare that in the name of Jesus. It's still going to be a great year. And I've known Pastor Kris for a long time. Funny enough, as I was sitting there listening to him talk about his wife and his kids and all that kind of stuff. So his daughter and my daughter and his son and my middle son, Braylon, are kind of neck and neck. They're right there. My daughter is 12. My son's 10, just turned 10. And Kris was married in 2006. Serena and I were married in 2006. So got a lot of, a lot of similarities there. And I'm really, really grateful that he is here. He is far more knowledgeable of the scriptures than I ever will be. And so I'm really, really thankful to have this man on here. And he brings a heritage. His family, his father has been in ministry for, God, I don't know, what's it been, like 40 years maybe, or something like that.
Maybe longer than that. Yeah.
Longer than that. A kids pastor for that long. I mean, that's what's crazy. He was a kids pastor for that long. And so he's just got a heritage in the ministry, man. And I'm really grateful to have him on tonight. Just wanted to bring a different perspective. And, love for you guys to shoot some questions out to both of us and let us answer just like we do on our Wednesday nights. Some Q&A. We've got some things we're going to ask each other. But while we're doing that and kind of breaking things open, you guys send those in and T's going to grab them from you and shoot them to us. So the most interesting thing for me, and I'm going to go off the scale for a minute and not talk spiritual. I'm going to talk just regular is I have literally built a new house since we've been in this thing. And so, I mean, I'm literally, somebody said the other day that sent me a word that said, as you've remodeled your house and it will not look the same as you come out of this, God is so remodeling you and you will not look the same when you come out of this. I received that in the name of Jesus. But yes, my house, and it's been a little bit of a headache. But I mean, it's just different. And so anyway, that's kind of been the most interesting thing, I guess, or odd thing since all of this. Yeah. Kris, you want to, or something out there to you, or we can.
Nah, let's go ahead and start with the question from each of you.
Okay. Kris, you want to shoot, or you want me to throw something out first?
I'll start with a question, let you answer first.
Right.
I've got a couple things that came to mind. One of them, both of them have to do with your context, how you've read the scriptures, how you've sort of led some of the foundation work, and also from your experience too. And so I'm just trying to figure out which one to start with. I'll start with this one, I guess. Even when I was at Rejuvenate and had spoken for you, one of the things I mentioned was just the boldness with which you lived out. Church planting is hard anyway. I get that. I think anybody who's been around a church planter or a church plant knows that there's difficulties involved in that. But really, for me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it was really that, and I can't remember the exact time frame, but it was that year before when you left the assignment you were at previous, and before you actually got up and off the ground with Rejuvenate. That was one of the most remarkable seasons that I've witnessed a person walk through. Just me personally, I know other people have done it through history and stuff, amazing things, but just me personally, and watching you kind of really trust God in a way that was bold, and it was, I mean, in ways that looked foolish from the outside. I mean, really, that's just how it looked. And yeah, there you go. So hindsight always 2020. But the question that I had, just kind of based off that season, that I had really thought. I know that big moves of faith require decisions, but sometimes I think maybe there's a romantic notion of the risk, but then there's a real notion of what the risk feels like. And I think all of us are probably facing some moment of faith. I mean, that's a continual thing for the child of God. I'm curious what you would say about that season, the reality of the fear that not fear that overtook you, but the fear of stepping into a place you had not been. I would be very curious what that looked like for you.
So, obviously there was there was much humanity in all that. There were many nights of crying, many days of crying, many, what I do now in panic moments. I mean, I think probably one of the, and I've said this several times, one of the most profound images that is burned in my brain is the number of times that I sat after everybody was already asleep, and just crying out to God while I'm looking, my house, while I'm looking towards my children's bedrooms, sitting on the couch upstairs while I'm looking towards my children's bedrooms, and just knowing, I guess, the innocence that they lay in their beds, trusting that tomorrow they'll get up and have food, they'll have a place to live, and be carefree about it, and then trusting me to be able to to be that and to provide that, and then from there, just realize, looking at God, because I didn't have an answer. I mean, I didn't know what was going to happen, but yet here I've got these kids that I know are relying on me and don't even have a clue about what I'm doing or dealing with. And so it's kind of where earth and heaven are meeting in one place right in the center of me. And I'm just letting it flow out in tears and oh my God, and all of this. And so that's one of the, I guess the most burned images in my brain. But I tell you, the thing that really has caused all that to happen, or caused me to have that kind of faith, and still does now, is you talk about a word, fear. But I remember a moment, and ironically enough, I was sitting in the truck of the former pastor that I used to serve with. I remember exactly where I was at, but I remember the moment that I really had this come to Jesus, I guess, aha type, experience in my brain, where the fear of God began to overtake every other fear of my life. And where I really just in that moment realized that as me, as the shepherd of my home, my responsibility is to be a covering. And as the covering of my home, if I'm not in right order, everything up under me is out of order. And so while stepping out into an unknown space seems risky, and it seems, challenging, it seems foolish, if that is in fact where God is moving, then I realized I had more fear in God, that if I don't get up and under him, everything that I'm responsible for all of a sudden becomes exposed.
Yeah.
And although I'm going to face some very scary things up and under that faith step, because I'm not going to be able to tangibly control my provision, and even making a church happen. I mean, I can't force people to show up to something that I'm trying to start, you know what I mean? And so I had no control. I still had more rest in that than if I said no to God and exposed my kids and my wife. And you and I know, I mean, in the church, how much my wife struggled with health issues for 13 years, and there are still challenges here and there. But all I could, and even with that, somebody could say, well, yeah, but because you're doing that, she's dealing with those things. And somewhat of that is true. And I know that my family has experienced some things because they're my family. They're connected to me. But I looked at it on the flip side. How bad could it have been? If I did not stay up and under him? You know what I mean? We wouldn't be in this place that we're at now, that after 13 years, she's healed, And so that was really it. The fear of the Lord became far greater than any other fear I had.
Yeah.
And that's the only way I really know how to explain. I just had a real understanding that God provides, and that God protects, and that, and I had to believe in that.
That's beautiful.
So that's kind of what it was. And that's still.
But you would agree, right, that anytime you move into that space, leaders are going to be lonely, even though God's with them. I mean, would that be fair to say?
I think that they're going to be lonely for a minute, but I don't think that they should remain lonely. I've kind of come to a place, because I really thought that, that's kind of been a common thing in leadership, is that, leadership is lonely. And it really, if it's real leadership, it should only be lonely for about a step. And I say that because if you're really leading people, you're taking them to where you are or where you're going. And so if I'm not raising people, not everybody necessarily, but if I'm not at least raising a team of people that somewhat share in that burden with me, and in that that wilderness with me, then I'm really not leading people. And so yes, there is. You and I both know this. We're always one step ahead, and so that burden is always a little bit heavier, and that risk is always a little bit greater, and that faith has to be a little bit stronger. And so yes, there is a little bit of that lonely place in there, but I don't think it should be a place where leaders live. I think it's dangerous.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's why I was curious what you were going to say. That's good.
Yeah. T, we got anything before I kind of flip it and ask?
Yeah. So we have one question. Well, we have two questions. I'm gonna ask the latter one first. If the government opened up churches in a few weeks, will you all feel leery about your congregation coming back? So could you kind of talk about your feelings in regards to how do we navigate coming out of this crisis, or what are your visions or plans?
Kris, why don't you take that and then I'll answer.
That's fine. Yeah, and we'd actually talked a little bit before everything started tonight about this.
They're having some problems with my audio. Is that any better? Can anybody tell? No?
Sounds the same.
I can hear you all right now.
Let's change something up here. I'll tell you what, let me keep talking through this and see if you guys let me know if you hear me more. Go ahead, Kris.
All right. There's a couple of things. We want to honor leadership. Like, we want to honor those who are nationally over us, because I've seen all kind of wild theories. I realize that some parts of politics are about power. I get that. That's part of the human nature, to get into a position where you can take more power. You're going to do that. I also don't believe that I've seen that much going on where people just want to run this into the ground to take all the power from people. So I'm going to trust the leaders that are over us at this point, particularly our state leaders, and say, if you don't say it's safe, then that's fine. If they do open it up, what they've done is they've essentially they've passed the ball to me. And if they tell me I can do this, that does not mean it's time to do it. That means that they've given me the option to do it as a leader, as a pastor. So I want to make sure, if they tell me in 2 weeks, hey, churches are free to open, I've got to look at our area, because I think this is a regional thing right now. And I want to say, hey, I am not going to put my people in danger. And there's 2 reasons why. First of all, because I love them. Yeah. And second of all, because I do believe if there's still danger, I believe God has something to say to us in that moment that we can only learn if we don't rush ahead of him. And I'm just convinced that we're not supposed to move ahead of him in this season as much as we feel like we want to. And man, it is a dangerous thing. We're talking about being lonely in leadership. I don't believe there's any lonelier place than being ahead of God in leadership and trying to race in front of him and tell him where to go. I am completely confident in the Holy Spirit of God to meet people wherever they worship, however they get the word of God to them, in whatever format that is. I trust the Spirit of God to do that. And so I have no problem starting back with some limitations, but I'm also not going to rush into it because I feel like, man, we're going to fall apart, or we're going to lose people. People are going to go to hell if we don't. No. God is perfectly capable of doing what God and God alone can do without me doing anything in this building. So that's kind of where I'm at philosophically and practically, I guess.
That's good. I completely agree. Great step, great stance, great point. I believe in honor and authority. And so I believe we first and foremost have a responsibility to honor our local and our state and our national authority. But like you said, if they pass that over, I said something this past Sunday in my message that I believe that, again, this is a very strategic time, and we don't need to be so quick to rush out of it that we miss while we're in it. Yep. And so I'm still in that same place. I want to look at it both practically and spiritually and say that there is still something that God is trying to stir. Matter of fact, I almost feel there's almost a part of me that doesn't want to come out of it yet, because of I still don't believe that we have captured everything. I don't believe I've captured everything yet that I want to absorb. I'm still hungry. I'm still what's funny is that last week, man, I felt like God was really stirring some things in me. I've been preaching the last 2 weeks on silent and hiding, and then all of a sudden this week God goes silent on me. And so I'm still right now like extremely hungry about what else can I grab in this? What else can I take away? And God, he did remind me today. I'll say this. He did remind me again today. He said this to me a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. He reminded me this again today, because it's easy. I don't know if you felt this way, but it's easy to, it's been easy for me to feel like I'm not doing enough right now. Like I need to be doing more. And it's even easy right now to draw comparisons to other ministries and, oh, they're doing this or they're doing that or whatever. And I'm not. This has been really a very quiet season for me. And it has been somewhat intentional. I have even left my leadership alone for the most part. We've not done as many staff, meetings and calls. We've done some. They've been a lot more low key. I've tried not to bother them as much because I'm just really trying to, just settle back and see what's happening and absorb what God's wanting to do. and what God's wanted to do in me. He told me 2 weeks back, he said, this is not a season for growth. This is a season for preparation. And so I've had to really push. That's helped keep me grounded with what I was just saying about maybe I'm not doing enough. Maybe we need to do. And he reminds me, this is not a season to grow the church. This is a season to prepare the church. Yeah. And the greatest way to prepare the church is not even through structure and procedure. It's through leading people towards presence. Challenging them and encouraging them. You better be silent with God. You better get with God. And that's the greatest way we can prepare, I feel, is that we better be spiritually prepared. Structural is important, obviously. And procedural is important, obviously, but nothing came to life until the Spirit entered in. And so if we better make that thing the first thing. And so if we're not tapping into the Spirit, we can start doing more stuff. And maybe we need to, do something different here with our digital stuff and live stream stuff, or maybe we need to serve more here. If we're not careful, we're going to end up doing the same thing in the season that we were doing out of it, which is being too busy.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
so I'm just trying to say, okay. And so that I translate that with going back into service by saying that I don't want to miss what God is trying to do from a practical standpoint. I want to be safe and cautious. The 29621 and the 29625 zip codes in Anderson County are the highest with the COVID virus. Yeah. And so that our 29621 is where our church sits. It's right in the middle of Anderson City. And I think the thing that kind of creates a challenge for me, in making a decision to go back is that our church lies right in the center of the city. Now the governor's giving the okay. The federal government's really trying to push to kind of open some things back commerce-wise. And we're not, at least in our area, we're still not seeing any downward trend with cases. Mm-hmm. It's still plateauing or elevating. And I'm a little worried. I'm not worried as in fear. I'm just apprehensive about them moving too fast. Yeah. And now it's going to really create a greater roadblock for us when we want to get back, because we're pushing people back before things have had the opportunity to dissipate and get well. Yeah. And so it's kind of creating a little bit of a challenge. So even right now for Rejuvenate, as much as people are ready, I had 4 messages yesterday alone. People asked me if we were having church this Sunday. And I just said, I had to tell them, I'm not willing to rush back. I'm not willing to rush back. I really want to see what begins to trend over the next 2 weeks when things begin to open back up, how the numbers begin to climb or fall or whatever, and then start making some decisions about that. Because like I told you guys, even before we got on, I don't want to kill the church, both physically and spiritually. I don't want to infect people because we've made a decision too fast. I also don't want to kill it spiritually because we decide to have church, but people are still living in a little bit of concern and fear, and only half the people show up, and then it looks like the church is spiritually dead. Yes. So I'm being patient. I want to be patient.
Thank you. Go ahead, Pastor.
I just want to say, there's an image that I have in my mind when somebody sees a piece of property that they've never been to, but they are interested perhaps in purchasing property. I think before you survey it, before you start to lay footers, before you clear the ground, you get a vision of what you want it to look like. And I think in this season, we have encountered churches, in particular the world as well, though, we have encountered a piece of land that we've never seen before in our lifetime. And I think, man, to start knocking down trees and grading it and deciding where we're going to put buildings, that is way, way too fast. I think there's a moment where we have to stand at the edge of that property and say, what can it be? What is it supposed to be? Your boy, Miles Monroe, said, an idea is stronger than an army. Like there is this idea that we don't take enough time to let ideas saturate our life. And so the visions we have look more like work than conceptions of what can be if we strategically approach a moment. Yeah. I don't think God has us here to work through this moment harder, even though I know it's been a lot of hard work during this season for me. But at some point, if we're not taking that time, and I'll say this and I'll leave it alone because I don't want to get too deep into this, but I know there's been a feeling. I know there's a feeling in me and a lot of people I've talked to that we've overreacted to something that is basically the flu. And I can't look around and say, well, maybe you're wrong. There's probably some truth to that. But in my mind, why have we been allowed to overreact? Other than maybe God is telling us, I didn't want you to underplay this. I wanted you in this season for the season that it could be. And I think some of us are pushing on it saying, well, there's a conspiracy or it's not as bad as we think it is. Maybe it's not. Praise God if it's not. But maybe God still has us here for a reason. And so I don't want to push through this until we see the land that we haven't been in and decide, hey, this is what God wants out of this. I mean,
the Bible says to set your mind where Christ is.
That's right.
So I got to quit looking at this thing from a national or a local standpoint and allowing news and allowing media and allowing governmental policy to dictate my thought process. I have to look above it.
That's right.
I have to set my mind where Christ is and begin to see what he's seeing right now.
Yeah.
And if we miss that, we have literally missed an opportunity of a lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to do that.
Thank you both for sharing. I definitely honor those responses. Out of all of the response or the answers, you both kind of displayed a love for your people and putting that first, kind of like God loves the church, right? And you are the shepherds, right, of your flock, and you have a responsibility outside of spirituality, but just in a human aspect to not put your people, right, in danger. And I honor that still while honoring your respect for authority and what that looks like with our local and state officials. And there's another question that talks about your members and their spiritual and their emotional kind of state of being during this crisis. Have you all kind of seen a difference in the emotional and spiritual state of your congregants, or are they growing? Or can you kind of talk about what you're doing as a pastor to kind of foster their spirituality and the emotional state with fear and worry during this time?
I obviously am not getting to have conversation with every person at Rejuvenate, but I guess in a large part of what I have been able to observe or connect with, I think it's been good. I mean, there are people that have wrestled through this and struggled through this, but even some of those that have had to deal with things with job issues and furloughs and different things like that have even had a very positive perspective about it and have pushed their faith to a level of relying on God in this season. And one thing I'm really I'm thankful about from the standpoint that God is providing, not that we've not had a chance to, but I mean, we've thrown out many times about, hey, we're here to help you. We're willing to help you if we can, help with groceries and whatever else. And we've not had anybody really that's reached out and said, hey, we're really struggling right now. We're willing to do that. We're willing to help. We want people to eat and not go hungry and families to be fed and whatnot. But I think that people, for the most part, are kind of, and I'm proud of this, are following the path of the leadership, that trying to press in deeper to what God is saying. I think there's begun to be, at least in a few, there's begun to be a unity and spirit in a sense of what God is trying to do. And I think it's really building a corporate anticipation for what's coming. And so I really think it's, I guess if I had to grade it, I think it would be in about 90% positive. I mean, there are some that have struggled, but I think in a large part, everybody's been good.
I know we've got several silver-haired saints here in Greenwood and at the church, and I think some of the disturbance has been, it's not that they're going to run out and do something crazy spiritually. That's not I don't think that's not the temptation. It is that there was a rhythm of life that church provided, and when that rhythm gets disturbed, it can be frustrating, makes you feel like you're wearing sandpaper a little bit, that sort of thing. And I think that has been one of the things I want to keep in front of people. Yes, we're going to gather back together, but this season is not over. This season is God's season. And to make sure that there's a hope in this season. I think if we lose the hope in the season, then we only want to get back to how it was. And so I think to try to minister to them through this has, hey, how's it going?
Sorry.
How the rapture took place. It's all right. I think to minister to them in the middle of this has looked like making sure that they know don't set a finish line that God didn't set. Because I think we have a high capacity for, as people, for putting up with things as long as we know that there's an end to it. And I think making sure that they don't believe, like the biggest mistake I could have made, I think, in the first 2 weeks is to say, next week we're coming to church. Next week we're going to be gathering again. I think God gave a lot of pastors, not just me, but a lot of ministers, the wisdom to say, okay, this might last longer than we think it's going to last. Don't put your hopes in gathering again. Let's endure the season, but let's persevere in Christ and make sure that He's speaking through this. And I think some of that hope, some of hope is standing in the middle of discomfort and knowing that it might not end tomorrow. Like I think that some of hope is about not putting false finish lines in front of people, because they can last. If I tell somebody, if you can survive a year at a job you hate, I'll give you $1 million. Man, they'll do it for that full year and sing every day on their way to work. But if I tell you, you're going to make $4 an hour and I'm not going to tell you how long you got to do this for, then people are going to start to gripe and grumble and complain. Because I think when we put finish lines on things without the same reward, without being able to define the reward, people get confused, they get ornery. And so I think for the emotional health of my people, I wanted to make sure that they knew God can move in this season. Every house can be a house of worship, and we don't know when we're coming back. So don't start thinking that we have to be back on a certain day, like God is on a timetable that we created. And so part of that was just trying to lead through that moment with wisdom and not push people to say, we got to get back or else. I think that's part of it. But for the most part, these are people who have been in the church a long time. Many of them, they're going to do their devotions. They're going to pray. Like a lot of them have better prayer lives than I do, for goodness sake. So they put me to shame constantly. And so my main concern was really, what can they learn? What can we learn together? Not are you going to fall away, and do something crazy like go shoot up a store or something. So I think there has been that balance for me personally as where I'm at.
Yeah, thank you. So kind of to stay here, but to shift a little bit in regards to you both as leaders and pastors, and kind of having to revamp the way in which you come to know church and doing church. So can you talk about rest? Like, what does rest look like in this particular season? Have you all been able to get rest? Or is it something you're struggling with? Do you see yourself kind of doing more now than you did prior to this particular pandemic? So can you kind of talk about, for those of us who are used to being busy? I know, Jason, you talked about it. How do you find rest in the midst of chaos?
So this really has kind of been, it's forced me to slow down. I was already in a place that I was trying to learn to manage my time better anyway, and have been for the last year and a half. Still haven't mastered it. Still a lot of times feel just like I can't fit everything in the time that I have. But one of the things that God has also tried to teach me over the last year is there is no substitute for His grace. And there is no, and so what I mean by that is first of all, obviously His presence, but His grace is what makes everything possible that we will walk in. And that if His grace doesn't invite me there, it doesn't make a difference how busy I am, I won't touch it. And so I'm trying to learn and even gain a greater understanding about God's grace and what it means to be present in that and not overrun that. And so one of the things in this season that it really has done is, and I can't tell you that I have the answer fully yet. But there's been an element to my days, even though things have been a little bit hectic around here with my house and stuff like that. There's been an element to my days that have I've been able to ensure that I create a routine that I'm honestly going to be somewhat broken if I have to change this when everything. I've been able to get up early. I've been able to be with God, first. I've been able to leave that and then exercise, unless my wife was going to exercise with me that day and we were going to do it together. I've been able to leave that and exercise and then eat breakfast and get ready for the day. And I've been able to accomplish two things in my life that I have wrote down that are non-negotiables for at least 2 hours out of my day, which are my spiritual wellness and my physical wellness. And then from there, I have, wrote down 2 other things in my life, 4 non-negotiables that I need in my life every day, which will take up about 3.5 hours: spiritual wellness, physical wellness, marital wellness. And so being able to spend a devotion time or a time connecting with my wife, and then some kind of personal growth, whether that's reading a little bit of a book, watching a podcast, something like that. And so I've been able to accomplish all 4 of those things quite regularly through in this. And it's something that has brought me great joy. Now, I can get into the other parts of my day, into the work parts of my day, essentially, and feel like that I'm still behind a little bit, and feeling like either I'm not doing enough, or I can't get anything accomplished, or whatever else it may be. And that's when God has had to back me down and say, but I'm teaching you right now how just to be present with me, and let me work it all out for you, as long as you grow to love the grace space that you're in with me, and be confident that God will make everything happen that is supposed to happen, as long as I'm taking care of being a great steward of God's presence. And so there's a part of this that I'm really have been asking myself the question over the last week: how does this translate when I leave out of here, what I've been able to do in here? And I've got to find a way to, it may, my days may change a little bit as far as where I'm at and when I'm where, if that makes sense, as far as church and home and things like, especially now that I've been able to have an office here at the house, and my exercise equipment is in my office, and it's a different dynamic right now. And it's caused me to have to slow my roll a little bit, and just learn and be patient, and even more so than I've tried to be, is be a little bit more patient, and just let God kind of work this thing out, and me just enjoy being slow and evaluating, I guess, what's really effective, what really matters. Do I really even need to do what I see everybody else doing?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Or do I just need to do what God is telling me I need to do right now? Does that make sense?
Yeah. What about you, Pastor Kris?
Yeah, I'm just taking notes. I have not done that well this season at all. Just be completely transparent. I've done a terrible job. I've worked more and probably accomplished less. And some of that's because of the uneasiness. And I trust God, but I don't trust myself. And so in those moments, and it has been a challenging season for me. And if I said anything else, my wife would slap me in the back of the head later on. So I want to be honest about this, because she knows, she's seen this. And when I'm somewhere, I'm not there. Like that's just been the story of this season. And I know that's not right. I know, I've got to be repentant about that. But some things I'm learning through failure, I think, in that. And God is so merciful. Like, God is so good in these seasons when we're trying to figure things out. He has not drawn that rod of painful discipline, but he continues to kind of lead me back into himself. Continues to kind of draw me back into himself when I get to those places. Like I can't tell you through these last few weeks how many times I have gone into season of prayer like I usually do. I mean, my mind is just 1,000 miles a minute. It's like my brain is walking on thumbtacks, and I cannot lock in and concentrate in the way that I usually can, in the way that I prefer to be able to. And I tell you, there have been times when I've just paced praying and asking God, I don't know what to tell you right now. Like, I don't know how to be in this moment right now, because I can't turn this thing off. And I tell you, there have been some of the sweetest moments with the Holy Spirit, in those moments where he has been with me and just said, you know what? I understand that. I get that you are finite. I get that you can't force yourself to be different right now, but I'm still present with you, and I'm not leaving you. I'm not going to forsake you in that moment. You don't have to be perfect or strong for me to be with you in this time. And I tell you, as much as I want to just say, I hear that, and like angels start singing and everything's great, just all of a sudden, like I'm still walking in that anxiousness in that moment, like that feeling of just, I can't be still, but I'm not walking alone in that moment. And so it's a different kind of moment. And so, I'm not resting as well as I'd like to. There's all kind of things I could say, but part of that probably has to do with my youth in my ministry career. I haven't done this for very long. And so this kind of hits me in a moment like I'm still trying to figure out how to be pastor of a regular church, much less another kind of church now. And so there's just been a lot of tension in me. And yesterday, I'll say this and I'll quit. Somebody might resonate with this. I was cutting the grass and I was about 30 minutes from being done. I was done. Like I was finished. I wasn't done with the grass, but I was done cutting grass for the evening. And so I started to jog, pushing the mower across the front yard, just trying to get it done quicker. And I realized about halfway, I was getting tired. I realized like, if I don't have time to finish 30 minutes of grass cutting, there's something wrong in my life. Like there's something wrong. I don't run the world. Like I'm not king of all this space. Like something is happening that I need to let go of. And so I am learning, but I'm learning slowly. And part of that's because I'm stubborn, I guess. But yeah, so I was taking some notes while Jason's talking because all that is definitely valid for me.
I got to tell you, this is just in my spirit. I'm certainly not trying to put you on the spot, but you said, I trust God, but I don't trust myself. If you trust God, you got to trust yourself. You're made in his image and he didn't put you in this position to fail, you know? And so matter of fact, oddly enough, I just shot a 4-minute video this morning on trust. And so Kelby's going to put that out at some point. But if you trust God, you got to trust yourself because he's the one that's got you here. And you need to let that happen. You know, and he believes in you or else you wouldn't be in this place. He believes in all of us. And I have to tell myself that. I'm telling myself that right now because I still feel, you know, it's easy. It's easy to look around and say, why am I not doing that yet? Or why haven't I gotten this done? Or why ain't I doing it like them or whatever? And you have to trust who God has you to be. And listen, I'm telling myself the same thing. I promise you that. I promise you that.
Appreciate
you
Thank
said
you.
We don't want to get ahead of God. You know, I mean, so we gotta stop. I'm getting ahead of God. What's up, T?
Yeah, I was about to say thank you, Kris, for sharing and being transparent. I think that takes a lot. And I think too, you know, and I've seen it with Jason, what pastors too is a lot of times you can be like a superhero, but you can be your own villain because you have this calling, you know you have this calling, but you spend a lot of time throughout the day kind of second guessing your adequacy or your worth to yourself. And you know, God called you both to be pastors and to be shepherds. And that comes with, you know, a lot, but sometimes we can be our own worst enemies when it comes to thinking that we're not adequate enough or thinking that, you know, it's kind of like these statements that we throw in, sneaking in like, oh, well, I'm not well versed in the Bible. Yes, you are well versed in the Bible. Yes, you know exactly what you're doing. Yes, you are called, and everybody can't do
Touche.
what you're doing. But with that, I want to add, you know, for the just the average Christian who maybe has lost their job. You know, it's a difficult season of mourning right now, specifically with the virus. So if you're losing a loved one, the protocols have changed in regards to that support and what we traditionally do for people who are in a season of mourning. So what do you say? As pastors, how do you encourage that person, that individual that is really on the brink of giving up hope during this season or giving up, just don't have faith? They don't have the energy to see themselves through. Like, what do you say to that person?
Kris, you want to go? You want me to go?
Yeah, sure, I will. Ironically, what I taught this evening in our Bible study, kind of, I felt some of that weight. I think because I knew the further along we got in this situation, you know, the first 2 weeks for some people, it's a vacation. It feels like yeah, kids out of school, I'm off work, you know, everything's okay. But once that first extension hit, it starts to get a little more real. Like it's not as comfortable anymore. It's like, okay, wait a second, what's happening? There's that instability, and in John chapter 20, you know, part of what happened when Jesus comes into that locked room where the disciples are in verses 19, 20, 21, he says, peace be with you, and they don't have any peace. It's only after he shows them the nail scars and the spear hole in his body and then says, peace be with you again, that they feel the gladness of that moment. And I think sometimes it's, when you're speaking to someone who doesn't seem to have anything on the horizon, I think it's important to remind them that Jesus went into a moment where there was nothing on the horizon and came out the other side. I think sometimes it's enough to be able to say there is another side, even if you don't see it. Like there is an end of the tunnel, whether you see the light or not. Like there's another side of that wall, whether you see the other side or not. And just to drive deeper into our souls, because we get it in our heads, we hear the Bible, we hear preachers say things all the time, but to get that down into our heart is a different situation. And to move from information to truth, or information to revelation, if you want to say it that way, like I think making sure people remember the one that we serve, the one that we follow, knows his way out of a grave. And so the end that you thought was going to be end isn't really an end. I know those can sound cliche at times, but I'm going to tell you, in the middle of dark circumstances, it matters to know that there is probably a way out. Even if you can't believe 100%, if you can go into it 75% believing that Jesus is going to come and show up, that makes a difference in the way that you fix your coffee in the morning, in the way you deal with your kids when they're yelling at you because they're out of school and they're impatient, how you deal with your spouse or your loved one. It matters in your walk with Christ to know that this might not be the last moment, that things can turn around, that tomorrow can be better than today. Like, I think just keeping that hope alive, that, because there's no easy answer. I mean, if somebody loses their job, I can't tell them, well, there's a place down the street hiring. That's not always happening. But whether that place is hiring or not, Jesus is still Jesus. And so he still knows how to move through this moment into a greater moment. So, I mean, that's really, as a pastor, that's my wheelhouse. That's the home run for me, is to say, if you can look at him and follow him, he'll show you a way out of the grave you think you're standing in.
Yeah. You know, I think practically speaking, one of the most important things you can do if you're struggling in your faith, in your perspective, is making sure that you're surrounding yourself with positive information, turning off the news, not paying attention to the social media where everybody's griping about this. Oh, our kids ain't going back no more. Or, it's been hell having my kids at home for the last 3 weeks, or, whatever. I mean, just whatever the negativity is, you're not going to find hope in negativity. And so, again, the Bible says to set our mind on things that are lovely and joyful. And so we have to ensure in those moments that we're feeding our spirit good food. And so staying away from the avenues of negativity, I think, would be really important, because the last thing you want to do when you're bleeding is have somebody pour salt on it. And so, and then I will say something that probably does sound cliche, is that if you're in that place, because I feel like I can say this with all of heaven behind me, I've been in that place. I've been in that place where I did not know where the next dollar was going to come from. I have been in that place. I have been in that place where I did not know how I was going to pay next month's mortgage. I have been in that place. And I think part of the reason I went through those places is it so I could lead people through those places. And so I have been in that place. So for me to look at you right now and you to think, well, he don't know what I'm talking. I know exactly what you're talking about. And I know exactly what you're talking about for almost 4 years, because it was almost 4 years before I took a paycheck that matched what I got at the job I left. And so, but here's what I say, to go back and say, it may be cliche. You're in the greatest place to see God move. You're in the greatest place to see God work. And I go back, Kris talks about when Jesus was about to give away the Spirit. I go back to when Jesus really received it. The Bible took him from a place of baptism when he was young, in his excitement about, I'm about to go into ministry and I'm about to do something great for the kingdom. And all of a sudden God thrusts him into the middle of a dead place, of a wilderness place, stripped him of everything. He didn't have no food in the cupboard. He didn't have a dollar bill to his name. He had nothing. He was depleted. All right. He was at what you want to call, he hit rock bottom, if that's, if you want to say that. And taking the approach, first of all, I think we apply too much information, or too much emphasis to emotion. And so the majority of people's relationship with God is based on emotion. And that's the danger, is that you better be sound on truth and not so much on emotion. And if you can become sound on truth and the principles of God, then the emotions will follow the principles and the truth of God. And so sometimes you got to talk yourself into something, and you may not be feeling it, but because you know the truth, because I know there is another side, because I know that Jesus did make it through the other side, then I have to encourage myself in that. And that's what Jesus did. We see it as him having a conversation with Satan while he's being tempted in the wilderness. But at the same time, he's having a conversation with Satan. My God, he's encouraging himself with the word of God. He's really just regurgitating, because right now I don't feel like everything's going great, but I still know the truth. And I'm going to cause myself to experience a great reward, because I'm going to declare the truth over my life. And so man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeded out of the mouth of God, and so on and so forth from there. And the Bible says that when he came to the end of that place, when he came to the other side, he walked out in the fullness of the Spirit. And so I believe that this is you don't know faith until you have to know faith. So right now is the greatest time for you to really find out what faith is about anyway.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well,
God is faithful.
Just to add, you'll never wind up anywhere trying to go two places at one time. You have to go one place at one time if you ever want to get to your destination. And I think what he said is so powerful, because if you're going to chase hopelessness and hope, then you'll wind up staying in the exact same place that you are. You won't get either one. You won't get the benefit of full on hopelessness and be, completely negative and just, want to end your life, but you also won't get to the place where you believe life goes on. You'll stay in that in between, in that liminal space where nothing good comes. Like I'm telling you, nothing good comes from that space standing in between. Yeah. So you determine your direction and then pursue it. Because if you try to split it, you'll never get anywhere. I think, and that it is. If you can't tell yourself, this is the way we're going, one foot in front of the other, I'm going to keep moving toward what I believe to be true, what God has told me to be true. If you can put one foot in front of the other, slow as you may go, you'll get there.
Yeah.
But if you don't, if you try and go two places, you'll never get there. It'll never happen.
And I'll say this, you never climb a mountain looking up. You look down and you take one step.
That's
because
right.
if you stand back and really look at the broad picture, you'll discourage yourself.
Yeah, that's right.
Through the mountain you have to climb, but if you'll put your head down and start, like you said, putting one foot in front of the other before too long, you're looking back and seeing how far you've come and how little you have to go.
That's right.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Both of you, God is faithful. We should have started this fireside chat out with like keeping a note tab of Jason and Kris's tweets, because you all have like stated so many like power lines that they're like tweetable, tweetable, actionable items. So we got about 5 minutes remaining on this chat, but I want to give each of you kind of like your closing statement, a word from God, anything that's on your heart that you want to share to the 54 people that are currently still with us. So
I really want to ask the question, what are you sensing? What are you sensing, coming out of this?
Yeah, what I think is supposed to come out of it is what I think God desires. I'll say it that way. I believe the will of God will always be done. I believe the desires of God are something that he gives us to choose sometimes. And so I do believe there's some flexibility there. I believe God desires us. And I'll put it this way. It's ironic. One of the questions I was going to ask you was about discipleship, but I'll just talk all over the top of it, I suppose. But I don't believe, and I'll say this and hear me out before there's hatchets and everything. I don't believe disciples are made in church. I believe disciples are made outside of church. And
I've been teaching that for a year.
There you go. If we,
well, I actually want to clarify that a little bit. Let me. I'll go back in a minute. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. That's fine. If we can't recapture what it means to be Christians outside of church, I'm talking about worshiping, praising, bold, faith-filled, power-walking kind of people outside of the walls of our houses of worship. If we can't recapture that, then we will be doomed to another generation of converts instead of disciples. And that's not going to change the world. Like that is not, that I don't believe, and again, this was part of my question, I don't believe the kingdom flows into this world through converts. It flows through disciples. It flows through people who are actually following Jesus where he'll take them, when they'll trust him, even if it doesn't make sense. Like that's when the power of heaven descends and changes situations and regions and areas. And so what I think we've had is a couple of generations of converts, people who wanted church to be convenient, make them feel good. It's a rhythm, and not, hey, my life has to be different every other moment of my week. And so I think God is maybe pushing us to say, recapture what that means in your own home. Recapture what it looks like to raise your kids in the fear and admonition of the Lord, and not turn them over to a children's pastor or a youth pastor every week, When you can disciple people who you see outside of church, when you can be a disciple in front of those people, things start to shift. I'm telling you, that is where Paul and Silas sing in jail, not in church. And the walls start to cave in, and the chains are breaking, and the prison doors are flinging open. That's when things shift and change, when we start to be who we actually are in places where nobody would expect us to be those people. Yeah. So I think that's where I hope the season is leading. What I'm afraid is that some of us just want to get back to church, instead of recapturing what God is trying to do by expanding and decentralizing what it means to be the church. And so that's some of that's a jumble, but I've prayed a lot over the last 3 or 4 weeks through this to try to get some kind of a way to articulate it. And that's the best I can do at this point.
Yeah, I think so. Just, in regards to discipleship and what you were saying about in the home, I'm going to take it a little bit deeper. And by saying that, yes, I think God has given us a great opportunity to learn how to disciple our home, but you cannot disciple with that unless you present a model. Jesus said, "Follow me." Paul said, "Follow me as I follow Christ." And so I begin to go back to this. If it has not been at this point, better be for the remainder of it a very personal season for you and God. Because yes, I believe the call to discipleship, the true commission of the kingdom to make disciples, to create ambassadors of the kingdom, is really the assignment, and it's more pressed now than it ever has been. And so that becomes what needs to be the bloodline of our life when we leave out of this. Sunday does not need to be a model. 7 days need to be a model.
That's right.
You need to be the model, and you need to have the confidence enough, the boldness enough. And I taught this with our folks some on Wednesday night. Somebody has got to be bold enough to believe in themselves to say, "Follow me. I'm worth following. I know I might not always understand everything, but I know how to tap into God. I know how to listen to God. I know how to engage his spirit. And what I don't have is a full understanding of every scripture that has ever been written. I can't quote you Old Testament and New Testament front and back. I can't do all of those things. But what I can do is show you how to say yes to God and walk it out and engage him. And in doing so, you can follow me, because not only am I going to try to set that, I'm telling you, follow me, because I'm going to hold myself accountable to presenting that model for you. And so, and then from that, I'm not only going to hold myself accountable to present that model for you, but as I walk, I'm going to invite you with me, and I'm going to encourage you to become that with me. And so I think that even more so, this thing is extremely personal right now. And at least that's how I'm trying to absorb it. I'm trying to make it very personal. I can't really say that every day I feel emotionally like there's been a win, but in a large part over the last 6 weeks, I feel like that something is changed. Something's shifted in me. Something's given me a different perspective. And that's why I don't want to be out of this yet, because I'm trying to maximize this and finish it well. I've taught our church that was the I guess the crowning joy of kingdom life on this earth is to say, I finished it. I finished this thing. Paul represented it well. He said, "Man, I can't do no more. I poured it out. I mean, I'm completely poured out, man. I ran the race. I kept the faith. I ain't got nothing else in me. I have finished." And that becomes the example, is that, what, we're really good at starting, and that's where converts come from, is we're really good at starting, but the church as a whole sucks at finishers. And listen, Jesus was all about finishing. So we need to do something. We need to grow and adapt and shift and find and be led by the Spirit in this, because what God has really done in this season of your life is trying to make something very personal, but yes, also trying to create a rest moment, because the heavy weight is about to come. And I don't mean that from the standpoint of like, you're going to work yourself to the bone. I mean that the burden is about to be laid on the body of Christ for the outpouring that is coming. And we need to be able to shoulder that burden, and we need to be able to finish. And so, yeah, go ahead.
His rest, and that passage in Matthew just comes to mind. His rest comes when we're near to him. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Like, I think the closer we get to him, we think it's going to be harder because it's countercultural. But the closer we get to him, it's actually easier because we stop caring about how the culture used to be that we wanted approval from. And we start owning up to the idea that the kingdom is the only culture that matters to us. And that king is the only one who is actually ruling over us and directing us. And so the nearer we get, the closer that we close that gap between us and Christ, the more rest there is, I think. And that is where I think this has to go. And every moment belongs to him, not just those moments when we worship in church or we sing and we preach. Every moment belongs to him, and that life that seems almost impossible becomes easier the more we do it. I do think that's part of this.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of what you're saying there in that passage, because when he says that, he says, "My yoke is easy," and that's something that we really have to capture. Is why God is really trying to draw us closer, more personally, is because when we come out of this, the ground that we're able to tread upon, we'll tread twice as fast if we can yoke in the right place. Man, I feel the power of God. Yeah, nice. We've been trying to tread ground in addition. We've been trying to stir ground through our own yoke. You know what I mean? And yeah. God is trying to draw us to that place that we yoke with him. And through this, man, the heart, we'll tread a lot more ground, a lot faster, and a lot more graceful, with a lot less exhaustion, essentially. And we will see a harvest. I declare it in the name of Jesus, prophetically, we will see a greater harvest in the latter part of our lives than what we have in the former that has come before this.
Isn't there a prophet that said something about the sower, or the reaper will overtake the sower in the Old Testament, where he talks about the idea that the one who starts to reap the harvest is going to catch up with the one who's planting seeds, because they're going to grow so fast that the sower won't be able to sow fast enough for that guy to pull everything out of the ground. Like, there is something different about that kind of season. And I think that there's an availability of that kind of season the closer that we get to Christ, and realize that when his yoke is on us, like you just said, it's so beautiful. When his yoke is on us, there's a whole different field that we're in. Like the quality of the soil is different. It's fertile soil, not rocky, not thorny. Like, that's the difference that takes place. So yeah, that's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Man.
Wow.
I don't want to quit.
Well, listen. No, well, they're telling us to keep going. So if you all have to go, you can go ahead and go. But they've asked for overtime. Serena said as much as she wants her husband to come upstairs, she's really enjoying it. So keep going, Pastor Kilgore. If you're fine, I could.
She's only saying that because you're on. Because if it was just me, she'd have been ready to shut it down.
Nisha might not. She's you by now. I'm telling you.
All right. No, they keep going. We good?
I mean, well, yeah, I guess, I would ask then, if we are going to keep going, what does a win look like in that kind of season? Like, when you look out across the landscape, when things shift and change, how does a win look different on the other side of that moment than it did, previously?
Sorry, did we lose Jason?
Might have.
Yep. He'll be back. Yeah. Do you want to answer that?
Give it a shot. I did. I honestly asked, because I was curious what he would say. I do think that there has to be a part of us that redefines what victory looks like. I think victory has looked like the overcoming of sickness. I know in a Pentecostal tradition that I was raised in, we believe in divine healing. We believe in the manifestations of God. And I think we have counted a win those things when those manifestations showed up. I think sometimes in another season, when people see us walk through valleys that are deeper, and we don't lose faith, and we still operate in it without doubt, I think at some point that becomes the kind of witness. Praise God, he's back from the dead. Well, that's 2 resurrections in one night.
Resurrected twice, man.
Can't beat that. I've been chewing this question to bits, so I need to hear what you've got to say.
Oh my God. What does a win? What does a win look like? I honestly hate that I didn't hear what you said. What does a win look like? What did you say? You want to give me just a short clip?
Yeah, a snippet would be that we've defined a lot of what we call wins in the church by manifestations, like tongues, prophecy, healings, that kind of thing. I just wonder if maybe as we move forward, it's not that we don't see those things, but it's that we see them in a different context. We see them in a context of burden and trouble, and the world sees the authenticity of those things. That I don't have to have everything in my life going great, and then I prophesy over somebody. Maybe some stuff in my life feels like it's falling apart, and I'm still prophesying over people. And suddenly an authenticity emerges in the midst of that. A peace emerges in the midst of that. I'm just kind of spitballing there, but and that's why I was curious what you were going to say.
I first of all, I've tried to lead a ministry that has good balance in regards to not being hyper spiritual, over emotional, and focusing on the wrong things essentially anyway, that are byproducts and not end results essentially. And so I've tried to do a good job of that. One thing, but at the same time, one thing about Rejuvenate is that we have big vision, and you know that. I mean, I've got very large vision, so it would be easy to try to point our minds and our perspective towards that, and start talking about numerical growth and border growth and influential growth and things like that. And so, and then another for me is because I'm not hyper spiritual from the standpoint that I believe that we've got to have altar services more, and there's got to be, falling out and run around, all that kind of mess is really of no good if it's not having effect outside of a Sunday somewhere.
Correct.
But at the same time, and this is a question I've been asking God, an awful lot in this season, because I've studied Acts again. I've been paralleling Acts with the letters of Paul and trying to read them, simultaneously. And the Bible talks about that the power of God manifesting from the truth of God, the word of God. And so I've also begun to frame that God, I believe there is an outpouring of the power, the demonstration of God, because the demonstration of God gave testimony that the presence of God was there. Right. To the unbelieving mind and to the shallow believing mind, the power of God, the demonstration of God, the manifestation of God gave testimony that the truth of God and the presence of God was there. And so that's a very legitimate part. And so I've kind of got three things here, essentially, numerical growth and influential growth and city growth and power and demonstration and all of those types of things that I believe are a part of our future. And I believe it's a part of what God wants to do. I believe that God desires for every church to grow because he desires bodies in the kingdom, and the church to be the hub, which becomes the central place of discipleship for those people. And so I believe that there should be and will be growth, exponential growth, body, butts in seat type growth, and influential growth with our cities and things like that, and then a demonstration of God. But I go back and I don't know that I can explain it. But one thing that I really try to press with Rejuvenate is that we're presence driven, we're presence seeking people. And to me, that's always the win. And I don't know how to tangibly paint a picture for that. Mm-hmm. It can be sensual. That can be part of it, but at the same time, it's also something that happens internally that creates this peace and this hunger, but also this confidence, and to be bold and to be to blaze a trail, and to be very proactive, not just in your church chair, but in your job line and in your homes and in your neighborhoods and on your chat boards. And so I don't really know that I know how to paint that picture, but I think the thing for me is to see the win is still about just a greater presence, and that being manifested by people. Maybe it's just a greater number of people who understand the presence of God, because I know there are some that get it, but maybe it's just a greater number of people that begin to understand the presence of God and manifest that and allow that to take over their life. And that begins to display itself in so many different ways. Mm-hmm. But I think it's just an authenticity of the pursuit of him. And I think that's probably the greatest win, is that we're no longer Laodicean, we're no longer playing church, but there is a passionate pursuit of the King. That I want him, and I want him more than I want anything else in my life. Yeah. And I know that there are other things in my life, but I want him so much because I want him in those places of my life. Right. And I think, to me, that's my win. Yeah. And that's why I go back to saying I believe it's very personal, because I think that it's about each person having their own experience with God that carries them to a greater level. That's not because I had one, or it's not because I preached one, or it's not because the altar had one. It is a very real manner of livelihood that they begin to live in.
Well, and I'll tell you one thing, something I'm learning, and I've been learning for the last couple of years, really, and it has to do with that. And I pray almost every day, and it is every day. I want God to fill me in a new way. I want God to expand who I am and all that kind of stuff. And what I'm learning, and really lessons that I've learned only through failure. I think some lessons I can only learn through failure. Everybody's maybe not like that. Maybe I've got to screw up just to learn anything. But through failure, what I'm learning is, because again, growing up in this tradition that I'm in, and in a Pentecostal sort of environment, I've heard people talk about the next level. I've heard people talk about, I want more of God. What does it look like to be hungry for God? I've heard those, but those are so nebulous because they don't put a fine point on what that actually looks like. And I think they're nebulous for a reason, because it's hard to put a fine point on those things. But I know for me, in this season and in the last couple of years, the season I've been in, more of God in my life looks like trusting God's ways more than I trust mine. And I never dreamed saying that would have had as much depth as it actually has. Like when I was a young Christian, I just assumed I trusted God. Mm-hmm. The older I get, the more I realize, man, I don't trust him. I don't trust him because I believe that my ways are better. Like I can read the verse that his ways are higher than mine, his thoughts are higher than mine, and I don't believe it. I can believe the Bible said it and I believe it's true. But when I go to make a decision, I believe that my way is better because it's more practical and because God ain't with me in that moment. And I'm the one who's got to decide whether I run the red light or not. Like at some point, that season for me looks like trusting that God's ways are actually better than mine, even when it makes no sense in that moment. Like for me to be filled with the Spirit of God, for me to have a testimony that actually resonates in public, that for me in this moment looks like I don't have to have the patterns of the world tell me what is actually the best pattern to have. That's that transform, renewed mind thinking versus conform thinking. And I'm telling you, it is hard for me to learn because my default is to do what makes sense instead of do what God says. And so I'm having to learn to really take those moments slowly. Like when I get to a point where it looks like I need to do this, I need to back off for a second and say, wait a second, if I want God to fill this moment, if I want, and I've heard you say it, if I want his reality to become my reality, then that means something different has to take place in the way that I respond to this moment. His ethics, his morals, his ways have to be greater than my ethics, morals, and ways. Mm-hmm. And I mean, to me, that's what that other side looks like. For me, it does anyway. That's what being filled with God more looks like. It means that when somebody slaps me and I want to slap them back, I actually believe that Jesus didn't just say, turn the other cheek because he wanted us to be different. He said, turn the other cheek because it's actually a better move. Yeah. Like that's hard for me to say. It's not just a command, but it's the way the world's supposed to work. Like I'm telling you, that trust is harder than obedience because I'll obey if I believe it, but trusting him is the hard part for me.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. One of the things that came to mind, the Spirit put on my mind when you all were talking was that and when you were talking about like the generations and the past generations, we have been doing church instead of being the church. And I think that's a big part of making converts, right? You're converting people instead of what Jason talked about, like transforming people, transforming lives. And I think that's the win is how us coming out of this and we are now the church instead of doing church. Because, if you just kind of sit back and think about this space and how God has really disrupted what the church is and how the church operates and everything that has just been procedural and performative, you really had to be authentic, and we've had the best worship that I've experienced since we've been in this season. And it's only been 8 people at max in the sanctuary, and we go live and we worship. And then we stay for an hour after we're off of live. And I think that's because we've all kind of tapped into this pursuit of Christ, and we've embraced this. I am the church, not the walls or this building or this campus. That's a space that we honor, right, as a holy space. But we should be holy vessels, out in the world. And I think that's the biggest thing. And it really, something else came to mind was when Pastor Tommy preached on laziness, and he talked about it how being lazy, and he talked about like this desire to not want to do. And I think that's where making converts come into effect of you being lazy, because being a disciple is hard work. Like you have to walk people through and walk with people on journeys, and people walking with you on journeys, and there's a level of accountability. When you're converting people, it's I speak the word and I move on, and that's on you. Like there's no responsibility, but that's not kind of discipleship. So speaking of that, can you all kind of talk about moving forward, what should discipleship look like? You know, if you had to kind of give a mini lecture really quick around what God really intended discipleship to look like, what would you all say discipleship should look like in a practical, 1, 2, 3, 4 type of thing?
I mean, I kind of rehearsed what we've talked about a little bit. I think that this, I mean, it goes back to this personal deal, because I don't think discipleship happens without a model. I just don't think it happens. I don't. There has to be a pattern, and if you, because that's the way it all began. There was a pattern, and then we were built in that pattern. We were built in that image, and that's how it all started. The Bible says he turned to himself and said, "Let us make man in our image." There was already a pattern that God said, "Follow me." And that's basically what he said. I mean, what you see in Genesis chapter 1, 26 through 28 is essentially the same thing that you get Jesus basically teaching in his commission to go and make disciples, or even when he's calling his disciples and saying, "Follow me." It's essentially the same language when he's saying, "I am the pattern, and I'm creating you, I'm rebirthing you like me, so that you not only look like me, but you act like me." And I think that's the thing about it, is like, even like Kris was talking about with the trust and beginning to respond to God with his ways, and that becoming the norm of life, is that I live by his ways. That has to be the foremost. That has to be the paramount in order for discipleship to happen. And that has to, you can't disciple people without authenticity and personal relationship with God. It will not happen. The Bible says that everything done in the darkness will be revealed in the light. And so you can hide it for a little while. You can't ever hide it from God, but you can hide it from somebody else for a little while, that I don't have this authentic relationship. I'm just trying to preach at you. And eventually it's going to reveal itself. And at that point, you not only destroyed yourself, and ruined your testimony, but you've carried people down that hole with you. And so I go back to this model. I believe that and I've been teaching discipleship and really challenging people in discipleship, but there has to be this commitment in this season. That's why you don't have anybody right now in this season to impress. There ain't nobody, right? You can't go to work and impress nobody. You can't go there and start preaching. You don't have nobody to impress. The only person you have to impress right now is God. And I think it's very strategic that God is bringing this thing back and says, "All right, look, Scooter, it's me and you right now. It's me and you. And we're going to get me and you right before I ever send you back out again." And it just comes back to, and so I don't even think that, we can start thinking about structurally what that looks like. Because I would, and I've told you guys this, I'd love to write the model on how the modern church becomes a discipling church. I would love for us to lead that charge. But I don't think that we can completely begin to develop this model until there is this commitment within ourselves that I'm going to be somebody worth following. And here's the thing, is not everybody's going to take on that challenge. But those of you that will, we're going to reach more people than you could have ever imagined through the multiplication of 3 people or 10 people or 24 people that are willing to really buy into a relationship with God, to an authentic relationship with God. We're going to reach more people than what we have experienced in our lifetime. I believe that there is a harvest coming. I do. I really believe it. There is a harvest coming where we will reap more people in the kingdom, and we may do it with less people.
Yeah. I'd say it with different words, but I think the same thing is true. If you look at especially set cultures that have been in existence for a long time, cultures create people who look like that culture. And so if you're born in Shanghai or Hong Kong, 9 out of 10 people born are going to look like the people in Shanghai or Hong Kong. America is kind of a unique thing because we're a melting pot. We got a lot of different cultures, but we even have our own ways. Like America is a very sarcastic nation. We produce sarcastic people. Our language is built on it. So culture reproduces itself. And I think a discipleship culture in the church, and what he just said is so powerful, because it doesn't take that many people to create a culture. Because all you've got to do is create an incubator for enough people to reproduce that culture, and then the incubator gets larger, and then people are reborn. So converts are just new birth. I mean, and where new birth happens is what happens along the way. I think that's where the church struggled. And I love the church, so I mean, I'm not going to gripe and slap it in the face, but we had too many converts in a culture that wasn't producing disciples. So converts remain converts instead of become disciples. I think, and what you see in the New Testament is Jesus is listening to the Father, watching what the Father's doing. So he says what the Father says and does what the Father does. He pulls 12 guys, 11 out of those 12, the vast majority, become the kind of people who are listening to what the Father is saying and watching what the Father is doing, and they start to do the exact same thing. Then 120 people do the exact same thing, and then 3,000, and then 10,000. So like, I think that expansion of the kingdom culture creates more kingdom people because you've created a culture in which people are born into. We've got to be very careful in the church what kind of culture we tolerate. Because if we're satisfied with something less, anything less than a culture that we're continually pressing out onto the edges with Christ, wherever he wants to take us, if we're satisfied with anything besides that, we will create people who are satisfied just to have their sins forgiven and go to heaven someday, instead of bringing the kingdom from heaven onto earth right now. That's the discipleship culture that I long to see, that I want to be a part of creating. You know, that's what I desire. Like, I desire that embryo, where seeds are dropped in that soil and produce those kind of people, because it'll happen. If you can get 6 people, I mean, that's why I think what you just said was so meaningful. If you had 5 or 6 people who really sold out to what God said and lived it out, anyone born out of that group and raised in that group will become just like that group. And so it doesn't take thousands. It takes a few, and then the growth will be exponential. And that to me is what discipleship is.
One's 1,000, two's 10,000. I mean, that's what
exactly right.
Multiplication of the kingdom. I mean, that's how this happens. And so that's what I begin to find hope in. Is I just want to, I obviously want to lead as many people and pastor as many people. I want to pastor a city. I mean, and beyond, a region or so on. But I'm really looking for people that really want to be real about being ambassadors on this earth.
Yeah.
Those are, I'm willing to preach to anybody, but I can do some work with a few people that are willing to be real about this thing. Absolutely. And honestly, funny that we kind of are going to this place. I think one of the things, and it's really even just so much more happened this week. I'm very leadership driven. I care about leaders, and I care about developing leaders. And we have the leadership school at Rejuvenate, and and we're always trying to create a culture to this where I'm trying to challenge you guys, and then challenging you guys to draw out some leaders. But one of the things, honestly, that in this time, I just spent some time this morning writing down some names, is that there's something in me right now, because I guess it's that I feel like God is maybe pushing, when we get out of this thing, is I've begun to try to listen to God and begin to write down some names that I believe are potentials for greater levels of development. And I've got to find some way that I begin to invest even more into developing leaders, and I'm not talking about other pastors and I'm talking about even within our house, developing and spending time in developing people even more when we get out of this thing, because it's not going to happen. The multiplication of Rejuvenate Church even is not going to happen, it's not going to happen from the 200 plus that are there. It's really going to happen probably from the 50 plus or the 75 plus that really become driven towards what God is doing in their life. And that's really where the mass of, because here's the thing is, I don't want to just put butts in seats. I want the butts there, but I want the butts that are there to be transformed by the power of God. I want something to translate from my life to theirs. I don't just want to be graded on how I preached. I want something to be received from who I've been and from who they've been with, that carries over and begins to impact and transform their life, that their lifestyle is beginning to take. I want them thinking about who I am or what I said or whatever when they're at home at 6:30 eating dinner with their family, and not just because it's 11:30 on a Sunday morning service. I want that resonating in what would, and please, I think everybody knows my heart. Not saying not trying to be sacrilegious or take Jesus's place. Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. I want them to be able to ask themselves in this question. I wonder what my pastor would do right now. I wonder the decision that he would make right now in this situation, and I'm in, and begin to think like that. And so I've just really even today I've been writing down some people and really trying to ask God, okay, well, what does this begin to look like when I get out of here, that I've already got leaders that I invest in, I've already got a leadership school that I invest in, but what else do I do? How else do I begin? Maybe these people aren't interested in a leadership school and a ministry school, but God's really challenging me to challenge them to go deeper in their walk with Him, to become models, to become patterns. That's really true leaders in our church. It's not necessarily just because they can do a ministry area well. It really the true leaders of our church begin to take on the identity of Christ. Right. And so that's what I'm really kind of looking at right now, is how do I begin to shape that more in some of these people that God's putting on my heart? And maybe it's more than who just God's putting on my heart. Maybe there's some that want to be a part of that. I'll tell you this right now, if anybody's still watching and you want to be a part of that, when we get out of this thing, you want to be a part of somehow going to another place in your identity with God that requires a little bit different level of accountability and investment. I'm your guy. We're going to do this when we get out of here. Just sign up. Let me know. Send me a message. Comment on here. Let's do it.
And just to piggyback that, Deuteronomy 6 and other places in that Old Testament, God continually tells the people, sit down with your house and tell them the stories of how you got here. So they'll believe when they get to those places that I'll get them past that moment too. You create that culture, you recreate that culture, you instill that culture with testimony and with word and with power and with relationship. And suddenly you find out that generation after generation, you sustain what has been started. I think that is so crucial. And we don't do that well in some places anyway in Christendom. We tell the story in broadcast ways. Like I can stand in front of people and preach to them and tell them, man, God's been faithful and this is what the Bible says. But am I doing that very well? Like when I'm at a restaurant and somebody just strikes up conversation, am I telling them the stories about how God got me to that place, so that there's a hunger in them to wonder how God could get them to the next place? You're reproducing that culture by spending time with people. And you're right. You said something, I think, super profound, and that is that we have been telling people to follow Jesus for so long that we have forsaken our responsibility to tell them to follow us. Yeah. And not that we're God, not that we're divine, but man, if I'm not living a life worth following, then what is wrong with my life and what do I need to change? I mean, that doesn't mean I'm perfect, but it does mean, Paul said, I'm the chief of all sinners, for goodness sake, but still follow me as I follow Christ. Don't follow me as I follow Paul, follow me as I follow Jesus. And at some point, man, if we don't take that kind of personal responsibility, I respect you, honor you for saying that, because that's something that people don't say as much as they should. If I'm not willing to say there's something about me worth following, I need to pack it up for a while and figure out what's going on, what went haywire, what short-circuited, because man, I want my kids to follow me. I better live a life where I want them to come in my footsteps and be on fire for God in the way that I am. And then some. I want more for them than I want for myself. But man, at some point, that responsibility matters in a discipleship culture.
I think if we don't disciple, and we wind up with what we grew up in, essentially, and not trying to knock a particular church, but in that matter of church lifestyle, because there haven't been leaders, because there haven't been models. There have been people that followed I guess an indoctrination or a way, but they did not tap into really understanding who God really was and who they were in Him enough to say, listen, I'm going to represent or replicate that in you, and I'm going to become that model. And that's why conversion has been the only thing that's been cyclic. And it's because not discipleship, because we've not had disciplers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, Pastor Kris, because I think it's easy to tell people to follow Jesus, right? But it's hard to tell people to follow you because that's a level of accountability that you put on yourself. And that's something that, Jason, I really appreciate you because you've been challenging us through our discipleship grow nights is just be that, be Christ. People supposed to follow you on earth. And I think a lot of times we kind of forget that Jesus was human. So we're telling people to follow Jesus, and they, especially new believers, still kind of have this mystical idea of Jesus Christ, right? And they don't see him as a human in his human form. But we're supposed to be that for them, in that example. But we're not walking in it, so we'll just say, "Oh yeah, follow Jesus," because I ain't living right. So it's hard for you to follow me. Listen, I wanted to just provide the space for you all. The great conversation. We still have viewers. If there's any questions or any last words that you all want to share before we kind of call it the night.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, I'm shocked that anybody wanted to listen to me that long. So I'm honored that anybody is still watching. Praise God. It's for you. It's for you guys. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. So you were saying though, go right ahead.
No, I'm just saying I'm really grateful. I love this. I mean, I eat this up. I love this, and I'm grateful for your willingness to get on tonight, and even after teaching and recording and doing your thing, for your body. And I hope some of those from your body have joined us tonight as well, and been on the show. I know some of the folks that used to hang out. I've watched a little bit. I've projected up on my TV and tried to watch some of the feed a little bit, and some of the folks that we grew up with have checked in and watched tonight. So I'm happy about that. But I'm really grateful for your time. I honor you. You talk about. You talk about the step, I guess, that I made, the faith step that I made, and you said, I don't know that I could have done it, but I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I could have done what you did, and probably would have killed a lot of people in the process. And so, I really have, I have a ton of respect for what you're doing because you're trying to right a ship, and I'm birthing something, and sometimes that can be easier. It was hard the way I did it, but sometimes that can be easier than trying to right a ship. And so I just honor the fact that you, probably much like myself, against some people's wishes, did not abandon the ship, but said, you know what, I believe I can be a savior for it. And so I celebrate that and honor you for that, and believe the grace of God to your demand for the job. So
appreciate that. I mean, I believe there's always a season of vision. I believe when God wants to shut something down, God shuts it down. But if he doesn't, then I believe that there's vision for it. And I believe that, it's one of those things, Esther said in the book of Esther, people are created for such a time as the moment that they're in. Like, I don't believe God didn't give birth to you or you, T, or me on accident in the season that we were given birth. I mean, 42 years ago, God knew where I would be, and he knew that he wanted me here. And so I take great confidence from that, not in myself necessarily, but in the fact that God actually, I can be weird. I mean, Nisha will tell you, I can be an odd duck sometimes. I have odd likes and dislikes and that kind of thing. And God knew all that. And God said, this is the season you need to be in. This is the place you need to be in. And I'm grateful that he allowed me to obey him. Like I don't know that I've always thought that way. I think sometimes I've pushed back and I've obeyed through clenched fists. Yeah. But man, I'm honored that I would have the opportunity to say yes. But that is it's so much like God just to say things aren't done. Because now those who are watching right now, 25 years ago, different story. That's a different conversation. I'm looking at making one or two decisions that would lead me to a much different life, a much more broken and shattered life, and maybe not even alive, for goodness sake. I mean, depending on how that road ended up looking. And here I am. I mean, God's incredible. I am so taken with who he is and what he's capable of doing. And I believe that that's possible in every life, in every city, in every church, in every situation. I just don't believe in no-win situations. I don't believe that there isn't vision that he can't cast that can raise the dead or give birth in barren places. I mean, that's who God is. That's who he's always been. And I'm going to trust that that's who he's going to be again. In Anderson, in Greenwood, in Greenville, all over this nation, all over this world. So
mercy of God to believe in us, we want a dream to believe in, but he believes so much more in our dream to be merciful enough to allow us to get there, to allow us to get to the place where we would
Yeah.
obey him. He was merciful enough for that long that said, I'm going to ride it out because I believe so much in in what I've put in you, that I'm willing to ride out the moments that you've disappointed me, because there will come a time such as this where you will be affirmed in me. And man, I'll tell you what, it's
Oh,
a thing.
I wouldn't have put up with me as long as God put up with me.
Nah.
I'm telling you, it is. When you look, I mean, we get to the place where we're cleaned up and stuff, but I'm telling you, when I look back several years ago, if I'm God, I'm pulling the ripcord. I'm saying, "No, I'm done. There's somebody else going to be better at this." But God sees what we don't see, man. I'm telling you, and there's a beauty to that is an emotional beauty to me, because at any stage in this journey, he could have said, you know what, I've given you chance after chance after chance after chance. And yet he says, I know what I created you for. And I spoke my word when you were born, when you were conceived. I spoke my word into your life and into the journey that you're going to take. And I'm not quitting on you, even when you want to quit on. I'm telling you, man, there is so much grace in that moment, and that you realize it wasn't my power. It wasn't my steam. It's God that got me here. And I might as well go ahead and ride it out, because he's got something going on for me. I mean, it's such a beautiful thing.
I love you, man. I'm proud of you. I appreciate the share screen time with you tonight. And thank you for agreeing to be with me. Would love to do it again. Would love to do it often. I mean, this is good. T, man, I love you, man. I love you like a brother. So thankful for you, my friend, and your time tonight and just hosting. And appreciate everybody checking in and watching, being with us. It's my heart that you've drawn something from this, and it's my heart that you'll share it. Maybe there's still somebody out there that needs to hear some of the faith conversation and some of the challenges, some of the transparency. So share this, man. And listen, we look forward to rejuvenate, folks. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow night for prayer at 7:00. And hey, we're gonna get through this thing. We're closer than we ever have been, but let's make sure we're still maximizing every day that we have in it. T, won't you finish us off, man?
Yeah. First off, thank you all. I admire both of you all, Jason. You're the pastor of the house, and I really respect and honor you and Pastor Kilgore. When Jason told us you were speaking, he doesn't let anybody in take that. So that means you came highly recommended. But I remember the first Sunday you came, and you came directly into our huddle. And just the spirit that God has on your life is just amazing. I honor that. You really just, I said, you tore down the house. Your word was amazing. You fit right into the culture of Rejuvenate. We knew that you were a man of God when you walked into, when you and your family, for that matter, walked into the morning huddle. So I definitely respect and honor you. Thank you both for being on here and being vulnerable. I know sometimes, being on staff, I kind of get to see the struggles that people don't see, that pastors go through, and being able to kind of watch you, Jason, and you be Christ-like, right? And you be transparent. And it's one thing to talk about having faith, but it's another thing to actually see somebody have to have faith, especially in difficult times. And just to see you kind of persevere through everything, even when you came back from Florida and the house was flooded, and you still found a way to say, we're gonna get through this. Like I'm dumping water out the house and emptying carpet, but we're gonna get through this. I think both of you were built for a time as this, and moving forward out of this season, I truly believe that Greenwood and Anderson are going to be changed. There's no going back to the norm. Like, God is telling us that there will be a new normal to how church is done and who is the church. And I believe there's a separation of true Christians that's going to come out of this. Either you want to go deeper with Christ, or you don't want to go, and that's okay. But I think under your leadership, there's going to be a spirit of discipling. So I thank you both. I can't wait for both of you to be in a physical space at one time. Oh my God, that might be like a Pentecostal experience for real. Like the fire of heaven might just come down. So we got to set that up. We really have to set that up. If it's some type of panel, some type of conference, it has to be something you both are holders of too much wisdom and knowledge I think you both can truly set the example of how the church uh, it should be uniting and not be competitive. A lot of times we see pastors trying to compete and trying to outdo another church, but I think God has called each of us to our own lane, and how you all respect that and support one another is beautiful. And people need to learn that. So thank you again for taking out, an hour and 45 minutes of your day to be online and to share with both of the church families, and just the continuity between you two is beautiful. I feel like, you might be like you were born together for this walk, this pastor walk. So, man, thank you all. Thank you again for everybody sharing and tuning in. We hit our max tonight with both audiences, so we're glad to have everybody. Please share this. I believe this tonight is going to change lives. There was some truth in this conversation, and somebody needs to see it. So DM it to somebody, share it on your page, however you get it out to people. We love you all so much. Thank you again for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you all in the near future.
Thank you guys very much.